Chris Lopresti from WFAN in New York has been kind enough to join us. We'll look at the Jets. Never a dull moment with Rex Ryan. Chris, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, guys. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you, too. What will be the most hilarious part of the Jets this year? Because there's normally one.
Most hilarious part, I would say, on paper right now could be their secondary. That's kind of what the fan base and the sports talk radio down here in New York City is focusing on at the moment. Secondary that struggled a lot of times last year, gave up some big plays, and they didn't really make any major upgrades there in free agency, and they've had some injury concerns here in the preseason. So everyone's kind of running for the hills about the secondary, specifically their cornerbacks. Jets are going to play some high-octane offenses and big-time quarterback-wide receiver combinations in the first half of the season. So we'll get a better idea once we get rolling here, but there are major question marks in that secondary, and it could be embarrassing for them if they don't find a way to overcome some of these injuries and the lack of depth that they have, at least on paper at this point in time.
It's funny because if you look at this Jets team last year, they took a beating in the media, and then you look at the final standings, and if not for a finish, I mean, they're pretty darn close, and if I'm not mistaken, 8-8. Is that a product of the division they play in, or were they underrated and just held up to a different standard because of Rex Ryan's debut in New York?
Well, I think there's a couple different ways to look at last year. I mean, if we go back to this time last year when people were making their preseason predictions, some people had the Jets as the worst team in the NFL.
Yeah.
Had them winning 2, 3, 4 games. I never quite bought into that. But I think 8-8 was a pleasant surprise. Now, if you look at the manner in which they got to those 8 wins, there were a couple of miraculous ones. Week 1 against the Bucs, there was a bonehead personal foul penalty towards the end of the game by Levante David that helped them win that game. They won a home game against the Patriots in overtime on a controversial penalty flag against the Pats. And then they finished strong. I think it was winning 3 out of their last 4 against some lesser competition down the stretch. So I don't want to throw cold water on it. 8 wins is 8 wins, and it was impressive considering what people were saying about them before the year. But there were reasons that they got to those 8 wins. So it was sort of some good things, some bad things. It saved Rex Ryan's job for the time being. But the pressure will certainly be on again now as we go into this season. They've made some upgrades. They've increased the talent across their roster. So the expectations certainly should go up a level compared to where they were this time last year.
Chris Lopresti, who covers the New York Jets here on Tim and Sid, Sportsnet Radio Network and 360. The season officially begins Thursday. Season for everybody else begins on the weekend. We cannot wait. You mentioned Rex Ryan, Chris, and job security. And it seems like it's a question going into every season, the last 3-4 seasons. Will this be it for Rex Ryan? What is the bar for him to stick around for 2015 record-wise? What does he have to hit?
I don't know that there's a definite because, again, like we just outlined about 8-8 last year, on paper that sounded like a pretty successful year when you looked at where they were preseason. But I think you have to look at how they go about getting there. I mean, are there crushing losses late in the year when they have a chance to make the playoffs? Do they have a slip-up against a team that on paper they're supposed to beat? Do they have any real quality wins against a team that arguably is a lot better than them? It's hard to just say, okay, well, he needs to get this many wins to save his job. I think we have to see how they go about that. And you want to make sure that the team continues to move in the right direction. I mean, what does Geno Smith look like in year 2 at quarterback? Is the offense able to step up from where they were last year, where other than their running game, it was a pretty mediocre unit? And can they overcome some of those question marks in the secondary and take advantage of the immense talent they have up front along the defensive line? So those are all different aspects of Rex Ryan's job and his tasks here heading into 2014 and questions that will be answered as we go throughout the course of the year. But I think, a 4th straight year without making the playoffs, I don't think that helps any head coach, specifically one that is employed in the New York City area.
Yeah, and that's part of the equation. But I wonder if, after cooking Mark Sanchez with Tim Tebow and the drafting of Geno Smith, they bring in Mike Vick on the 1-year, $5 million deal. They also reunite him with Marty Morenweg, who, if you don't remember, was his coordinator in Philly. He had his best season under Morenweg. Have they put a different kind of pressure now on Geno Smith? And didn't they learn from the first time around with how it worked with Sanchez that this might come back to bite him in the ass?
Well, I think they're taking a different approach if you look at it closely. I mean,
Okay.
With Sanchez, they had Mark Brunell here, who was basically a father figure for Sanchez. He wasn't going to play.
Right.
The Tebow thing, that I still think that was more of the owner's decision. I think they and the GM specifically. I don't know that was Rex signing off on that, and it obviously blew up in their face and never quite worked out any stretch. So people make the argument that they actually coddled Sanchez and that they didn't bring in stiff quarterback competition for him, and he kind of just went along and didn't feel that pressure. With Geno, you mentioned it, they bring in a guy in Mike Vick who's certainly established himself in the league. Yes, he's 34 and on the downside of his career, but still has ability, still has talent and athleticism. So I think that the message to Geno was pretty clear from the get-go that, hey, we're going to give you an opportunity to win this job and be the guy, but we also have significantly upgraded our backup situation. So if you go out and you don't get the job done and you're performing poorly early in the season, you continue to turn the ball over at the rate you did as a rookie, we have an established guy ready to come in that we would feel pretty good about to step in and win some games. And to Geno's credit, I think he's handled it quite well thus far. He's been very impressive all the way from the spring off-season program right through the end of the preseason, and I think he's in very good position as he gets ready to start his second regular season in the NFL.
The Chris Johnson experiment in the backfield. You know, we've seen running backs on the tail end of their careers, i.e. LaDainian Tomlinson, go in there and not be nearly as good and be unhappy very quickly, and it wasn't what people expected. Yeah. Is Chris Johnson going to be different?
I think it sets up well. I think he has fit in quite well thus far, and I thought it looked pretty good in the preseason coming off a knee meniscus surgery. So he says the knee's healthy. He says it feels explosive. He made some nice plays in the preseason. And I think what we have to look at with Chris Johnson, and he's mentioned this, I think he understands, he's a guy that's used to getting a ton of reps, touches, carries in his time in Tennessee. But, you know, as he creeps towards age 30, we know maybe that's where running backs start to take a dip with their production. The Jets have a nice crop of runners here in the backfield, along with Chris Ivory and Bilal Powell. I think each guy brings a little something different to the table. So I don't know that Johnson's going to be that bell cow back, but he certainly brings the Jets a dynamic that they didn't have last year. A guy who can get to the edge, has the home run hitting speed even at his age. He can be a productive pass catcher out of the backfield, whereas Ivory and Powell maybe don't give you that. So I think each of the three guys brings a little something different. Ivory's definitely an upgrade in talent. I think it's the deepest backfield the Jets have had in quite some time. I would expect him to be very productive, but I don't know that he's going to be a every series three-down back this year for the Jets.
Chris Lopresti joining us from WFAN in New York, right here on Tim and Sid. Before we let you go, we've been asking everybody who is kind of close to their teams to help our Tim and citizens fill out their fantasy football teams. Is there a sleeper on this Jets team that you could look at that might be able to help either through a waiver wire or maybe a late round pick if you haven't drafted yet?
I'll give you two guys. I think Chris Johnson and Eric Decker are established names that people know about. The first guy I would say would be tight end Jason Morrow, who was a second-round pick out of Texas Tech, an extremely productive pass catcher in his time in college. He's still kind of finding his way into this NFL-type West Coast offense, very different from what he did in college, but a versatile guy that I think the Jets are really excited about and also gives them a dynamic that they haven't really had. You're going to see him line up all over the field. He'll spend some time in the backfield, along the line of scrimmage, in the slot, even flexed out wide at times. So if you're in a PPR league, maybe not right off the bat, but later in the season as this guy starts to come along, I think he could be a pretty productive pass catcher. And the other guy I think is Geno Smith. I fully expect him to cut down on turnovers this year. So if you're looking for a backup quarterback, a guy that can run the ball, dual threat, he had a bunch of rushing touchdowns last year. He's not going to be an upper echelon fantasy quarterback, but if you need a guy on a bye week, I think he can put together some good games for you. I think he's really going to turn it around and have a much better statistical season in his second year than he did as a rookie.
And he's a guy who's going to be there. Like, you come around second time in every draft, Geno Smith is going to be around for a bit.
Third time around, too, maybe.
Or maybe third time around. With all due respect to Geno. Chris, listen, we appreciate it. Enjoy the year. It's always fun covering that team, I could tell. And let's do this again throughout the season. Thank you.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks for having me.